The future is African.
Ahead of the next UN General Assembly, the Global South is calling for a more equitable international system. Can Africa lead that change and help reset the global order?
Africa cannot continue to be a dependent continent. There are things we can do so that we're able to have a better voice in global affairs.
We traveled to Accra to speak with Ghana's President John Mahama about his vision for a new global architecture built on dignity and partnership with Africa, not injustice and exploitation.
The challenge that us leaders of Africa today face is not a liberation struggle that was fought by Kwame Nkrumah and our forebears. It is the economic struggle. We don't reject partnerships, but those partnerships must be on our terms. Africa's prosperity is not a threat to anybody.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Bigger Than Five with me, Rida Fakhri. As the international order comes under increasing strain, countries across the Global South are demanding a greater voice in shaping the rules that govern it. One of them is the West African nation of Ghana. We're in the capital city, Accra, where President John Mahama is positioning Ghana and Africa to play a greater role in the push for a more representative and equitable global order. At the center of that effort is President Mahama's Accra Reset Agenda, an initiative aimed at moving Africa from dependency toward greater resilience and influence in global affairs. I sat down with President Mahama to discuss Ghana's ambitions for Africa, the push to reform global governance, and whether this is the defining moment the continent can translate its growing influence into lasting power. Mr. President, thank you very much for having us here at Jubilee House and for taking the time to speak with us today.
No, thanks for having me.
The Western-led international order has come under increasing scrutiny and pressure as more and more countries in Africa, but also across the Global South, are demanding a greater voice. You have been calling not just for reform, but for a fundamental reset of the way the rest of the world engages with Africa. It's a lofty, ambitious initiative. In practical terms, what does it actually mean?
Well, it's born out of reality. 80 years after the Second World War, the new global order was formed based on multilateralism. And it placed Africa in a situation where we have had a dependency syndrome. And so we live on the handouts that the West gives us. And then aside from that, we don't control our resources. Our resources are bought at prices that are set by the West and exported, and the finished products are sent back to us at prices that are set by the West. And so the whole idea of the research started with the issue of health sovereignty and breaking the dependency syndrome. So we convened a conference here and said, look, we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We must create more resilient health systems. We must produce more of our medications locally in Africa. We must finance our health outcomes more ourselves. We don't reject partnerships, but those partnerships must be on our terms. We must have a greater say in what those resources are used for. And so we had the Accra Reset Conference. But then it's gone a step further because it applies to other things, including the whole global order. Africa cannot continue to be a dependent continent. There are things we can do so that we're able to have a better voice in global affairs. And so that's where it all started, and it's continued.
But how do you actually break that dependency syndrome that you speak about? How do you make sure that Africa as a whole can assert itself and be seen through a different lens as a global partner, not as a continent that has long been seen through the lens of turmoil, conflict, and dependency?
Let me say one thing. Africa's prosperity is not a threat to anybody. Indeed, Africa's prosperity will be a benefit to the whole global economy. And so it's in the interest of the whole world that Africa prospers and that Africa does well. and that we're able to overcome the challenges that we face in terms of, growing our economies, in terms of, providing education for our people, in terms of healthcare and all that. We can do things better. One, in Ghana, we've started with the reset agenda. We call it the reset agenda. We believe that the time has come for us to add value to our natural resources rather than just export them. And I'll give you a few examples. From colonial periods, we have been the second largest exporter of cocoa beans. Now, just about 30% of those cocoa beans are processed locally. The rest, 70%, is shipped abroad. Those beans that are shipped abroad represent jobs that are leaving Ghana because the processing takes place. Sometimes we have to import them back. So we are saying that, look, we want to raise processing to at least 50%. And so we're changing the model by which we finance cocoa purchases. We're raising those bonds ourselves. We took a bill to Parliament. Parliament has approved it. So we've changed that model to give us better control of our beans. I've also said that by 2030, we want to end raw ore, mineral ore exports. We want to process those ores here. Manganese and all of them are special minerals that are useful for the whole EV revolution and all that. Yeah. And so we can do some of the primary and secondary processing of those minerals here.
You're talking about Ghana asserting itself economically with a new model. But the question is, will the rest of the world accept this new assertive partnership? Your vision doesn't just entail countries acknowledging the historical injustices that they have been responsible for, but also holding them accountable for the exploitation of Africa's natural resources and people. Does Africa today have the leverage it needs to change this equation?
We can if we stand together and speak with one voice. And I believe that this is the time for the continent to become more integrated and united than we've been in the past. Africa and a lot of the global south is in the position it is because of two historical events whose consequences are still enduring. One is the slave trade and the heinous effects that it had on Africa and the countries of the Caribbean and all other places where labor was sent, for extraction. And it created, wealth that still exists today in certain families and certain businesses. That was the first. And then after slave trade was abolished, a new way had to be found to still keep Africa under domination. And so colonialism in the 19th century, the European powers sat down and just drew maps and divided Africa amongst themselves. And it wasn't until the late 1950s that Ghana in 57 became the first African country south of the Sahara to get its independence. That order is what continues to account for the current global order. And I believe that if Africa comes together and we speak with one voice and we're integrated, we can influence the new global order that is coming. The issue of reparations. Reparations has been talked about over the decades. We became the champions for reparations and restitutive justice. I realized that we're all singing from different hymn sheets. And so the first thing we had to do was let's all come together and sing from the same page. And so we began building a coalition from North America to Latin America to the Caribbean to Africa. And once we started to sing from the same hymn sheet and speak with one voice, we had the UN General Assembly accept our resolution with 123 countries.
You did, but there were still 3 nations that voted against this resolution, yes, which in fact you were mostly behind. It's a resolution that Ghana, yes, pushed through. 3 countries voted against: the United States, Israel, and Argentina. Did that surprise you?
It didn't surprise me.
Why not?
Because we had gotten indication from the United States that they won't support it. And the main argument they put was that you cannot create a hierarchy of crime.
But were you disappointed that they voted
I was
against?
disappointed that they did, because I don't hold the U.S. accountable for slavery. Those slaves were brought there mostly by European powers, because at that time, U.S. itself was a colony. Even though after the abolition and after United States became an independent country, slavery continued until the Civil War was fought. And that eventually what freed the slaves in the U.S. So I don't think the U.S. should take responsibility for slave trade. I mean, when
But
we
the
talk
U.S.
about,
benefited greatly. Do you
no, it
not hold
did.
them
I mean, it
responsible?
built their railways, it did things for them and all that. But I don't think that they should bear the guilt, in a certain sense for it, because I would have thought that the European countries that brought the slaves there would feel more adverse to the resolution and probably would have voted for it. But even they abstained.
But this was a symbolic resolution,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Yes.
Which essentially called the slave trade the gravest crime against humanity.
Yeah.
But you have gone further.
Yes.
You have been calling for reparations.
Yeah.
Is that wishful thinking? How do you make countries that benefited from the slave trade actually pay back?
It's justified. It's justified because
But is it realistic?
it's justified. And when we talk about reparations, we don't kid ourselves that those nations will just get up and write a big fat check and say, here you are, we're paid off for what happened. No. We think that there are many aspects to reparations. First, acknowledgement. Let's acknowledge it. It's like they want us to sweep it under the carpet. Before you couldn't talk about reparations and slave trade. It's a closed chapter. That's it. We don't talk about it. We say no. Let's talk about it. Let's acknowledge. And since the resolution, you'll be surprised at what's happening. Several, organizations and nations have begun to say, look, I think let's talk. Let's create a dialogue on this issue.
But this is not about financial reparations, is it, Mr.
We've
President?
not gotten there yet. We're talking of acknowledgement. We're talking about healing. We're talking about, reparations can take the form of changing the global order. It takes many forms. And I'm saying that I don't think that they're going to write a 300 billion check and say, here you are, descendants of slaves. Here you are, take this check and, let's let it pass, We must even learn from the lessons of history. I mean, we talk about the Holocaust today, we still talk about it because never again should it happen that millions of people are put in railway trucks and sent into gas chambers and gas to them. That was horror, but we can't forget it. If we forget and we don't acknowledge what happened and all pledge that we will work to not make it happen again, it could happen again.
But isn't it happening again? Mr. President, when you look at what's going on in Palestine,
you look at Gaza, you look at the West Bank.
What would you call it?
It's what it is.
Is it a genocide?
I said it works like a duck. It looks like a duck. It's a duck.
It's a genocide.
Of course. Because, look at the number of people who have been killed. Of course, we condemn what Hamas did, killing 1,300 Israelis. But the toll on the other side, 65,000 women and children have been killed since that October strike. And even today in the West Bank, settlers are hounding Palestinians of their land, and they go create the problem with families that have been settled on that land for many years. And then they go and tell the Israeli authorities that the Palestinians are, attacking them, and the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, comes without asking any questions, joins the settlers to brutalize the Palestinians,
You talk about the need to reform the global system. International justice is a key part of it, isn't it?
Exactly. Does
this demonstrate the double standards that we see today? When you compare the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Gaza, can we ever talk about justice anymore?
It's not the first time. It's been with us. Look at the fight against apartheid. Until the ANC and the freedom fighters of South Africa, together with the frontline states, put a lot of pressure on South Africa to eventually let go apartheid. Some of their greatest backers and allies were the Western nations. And so that hypocrisy has been with us. Different lenses are used to look at different situations. And the point is, as long as we continue to distort justice, depending on who it is, we'll continue to live a lie. I mean, we must say things for what they are. And that's why Africa is pushing for greater representation on the UN Security Council.
Precisely. And you told the UN General Assembly last year, Mr. President, that today's institutions no longer reflect today's world.
Exactly.
I don't think there's anyone who can argue with this.
Exactly.
But 30 years after Nelson Mandela made the same argument, the UN Security Council still does not have an African state as a permanent member. Despite the fact that the continent represents a fifth of the world's population, is Africa simply waiting for something that isn't going to come?
Well, not only Africa, because the push for greater representation is the global south. And so it's not only Africa. But again, like on the issues of reparations, what I told you, we're speaking from different hymn sheets. Everybody is making his pitch from their own hymn sheets. In Africa, we went and passed the consensus they call the Zulu consensus. And we said that we wanted the global reform of the United Nations to involve expanding the Security Council and allowing greater African representation, and then at the same time, either removal of the veto or extension of the veto to cover the expanded membership. Now, the point I've made, and I've made it before and I'll make it again, is that we need a two-step solution. And so we should speak with one voice and ask for an expansion of the Security Council. Once we expand the Security Council and we have better representation of the Security Council, then we can discuss the veto. But of course, the countries that have the veto are not going to even consider reform of the Security Council when, even before you've expanded the membership, you're asking for, a determination of what happens to the veto. We need to change our strategy, and we need to speak with one voice.
But can
Global South.
Can you speak with the one voice as African nations? Let's say the Security Council offered you 1 or 2 permanent seats tomorrow. How should Africa decide which country or countries will represent the continent? Can it unite?
I think we can. I believe that it would have been best if we got 5 seats, because Africa has 5 regions. And so each region would have representation.
But do you think realistically Africa can demand this greater voice if it cannot often speak with that one unified voice? We saw the migrant crisis in South Africa recently.
Yeah.
Can you be united? And which of the countries? South Africa has always been tipped as one of the main candidates. And Nigeria with 230 million people. There's also Egypt.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with who represents us. I think we can reach a consensus on it. Africa needs more integration at this point. And that's why what happened in South Africa is unfortunate, because it comes at a time when we're trying to trade, more amongst ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're trying to improve movement of people and goods across the continent. And so when these, I call them xenophobic, they don't want us to use the word xenophobic, but when these xenophobic actions happen, then it sets back the integration of the continent. Yes, we can discuss the issue of migration, and I think it's something we can put on the agenda of the African Union to discuss. We can discuss the issue of migration, but I do think that you cannot solve migration issues with vigilantism. Vigilantism is not the way to deal with issues of migration. But I'm happy for South Africa and us to put the issue of migration on the agenda of the African Union, because we need free movement of our people. We need better integration. This is when we need integration.
And unity. On the topic of African representation on the Security Council, what do you think should be the key criteria? Is it the size of the population? Is it the diplomatic weight, the regional influence? Who do you think is best?
We can work that out ourselves. I don't mind. I mean,
who do you think would be the best candidate to represent Africa?
Like you said, South Africa is a good candidate. Nigeria is a good candidate. Nigeria is the largest Black nation in the world, not in Africa, in the world. And so if Nigeria is a member of the Security Council, it's justified.
Would you accept a non-sub-Saharan African state?
Yeah. North Africa. Yes, why not? Egypt, Algeria, Morocco. Why not?
Okay.
They're part of Africa.
Another key issue, though, is whether the current 5 permanent members of the Security Council will ever accept willingly either to give up their veto or to share it with a growing number of countries.
And several of the countries have, given indication that they are not averse to an expansion of the Security Council. China has expressed support for Africa's request for greater representation in the Security Council. We can expand the veto and give one veto to the new members, or we can take the veto away completely, and all of us.
Do you really believe the US and others will accept you taking the veto away from them?
Well, I think that even if the veto is not taken, there might be some restrictions on how it's used. I mean, if there are cases of genocide that are discussed at the Security Council, it's unconscionable for any country to veto, that resolution. And so I think that even if the veto is not taken away, some exceptions must be made, especially when there's genocide involved.
You have said the global financial system is rigged against Africa. Who's responsible for maintaining this system? Who benefits from it?
Well, that comes from the global order that was formed after the Second World War. So we're saying that there should be a reordering of the whole global economic order, including the financial architecture. But we cannot wait for that to be given to us on a silver platter. And that's why we're saying that we must come together and strengthen African financial institutions. Again, I'm the champion for strengthening African financial institutions. Africa has billions of dollars in foreign reserves held outside the continent. And so if we even agree that we'll take 30% of our foreign reserves and put it into African Development Bank or an African financial institution so that we could go and borrow at affordable rates for our own infrastructure development, I think that's a starting point.
Will the US and European powers accept that?
Why not? I mean, there's no rule that stops us from putting our reserves in an African financial institution. If we took 30% of our reserves and decided to put it into an African monetary fund, nobody can stop us.
How soon can that happen realistically?
Well, we have to come to a consensus. On the sidelines of the AU, we normally hold a function for African financial institutions. At the last discussion, this came up, including other ways in which we could strengthen those institutions. And so every year we compare notes and see how we're doing. For instance, the Africa Exim Bank is doing very well in terms of financing, important investments. And so we need a railway to the mines. We need an aluminum refinery. We need a thermal power plant to provide power. These are things that if we decide to go to the international capital market for money, the rate at which we will borrow will be too expensive. But if we could borrow from an African financial institution at 2%, 3%, I mean, that would be wonderful.
Ghana is the top gold producer in Africa.
Yes.
How much leverage can that give you?
It gives us a lot of leverage, especially if we're able to formalize the gold production. We have the large-scale mines that, are transparent. We know what is happening. We know we supervise the mining. We know how much they are shipping out. But we also have the informal, artisanal, and small-scale mining. That is where we had the most difficulty, but we're formalizing it now. And so we're giving them licenses, and then we're supervising them better. But we're buying the gold off them before it used to be smuggled out by anybody. We're buying the gold off them. And that took production from 64 tons in 2024 to 104 tons and brought $10.8 billion into the economy. But we're going one step beyond just exporting the raw gold. We have 2 refineries currently operating in Ghana, the Gold Coast Refinery and Royal Ghana Gold. And we are refining that gold before export. It's part of the whole value addition policy that I told you about.
So at the end of your term, would economic success look like Ghana refining its gold?
Yes.
Or
and actually
Well,
producing
more than
jewelry.
that.
Producing jewelry. You know, speaking with the gold board, and they're going to build a gold souk in Ghana to produce African and Ghanaian jewelry. And so next time you come in to buy your earrings, you're probably not going to go to Dubai. You're going to come to Accra and buy
Great.
beautiful Jinyomi earrings.
So I'll be buying not just beads, African beads, but actually
You
African
can buy
gold.
African beads, you can buy African gold.
You've talked about how the economic international system is rigged against Africa. Would you say that the international legal system is also rigged against Africa? Because if you look at the first few decades of the International Criminal Court, all the cases that it was prosecuting were to do with African leaders. Do you feel that there are two standards here?
Yes, definitely there. I don't say that if African leaders or Africans are involved in crimes against humanity, they should not be tried by the courts. But I mean, there are crimes against humanity committed by others, and they actually even threaten to sanction the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court represents the pinnacle of justice against impunity. But unfortunately, the countries that matter most have refused to sign up to the statutes and consider themselves and even threaten the court with sanctions.
There have been sanctions imposed on some of the judges.
On some of the judges, yeah, it's true. I believe that justice must apply to all. If we want a fair global order, all of us must subject ourselves to respecting the rules. And if we go against the rules, there must be an organization, a body that is able to adjudicate, what has happened.
But given these double standards, do you think that these institutions, like the ICC, can be reformed, or do you need alternatives?
Well, if they want us to reform it, why not? They should come with suggestions.
But who will come with suggestions?
All of us.
The global south.
The global north.
The global south.
Yes.
I want to ask you about the relationship between Ghana and some of the world's major powers. Yeah. Today, Ghana isn't depending on the United States, China, Europe, or Russia like it once might have. You've got many more options and partnerships. Yeah. How do you evaluate the relationship with these major powers? How dependent do you still remain on any of them?
That is what I call the reset agenda. As I speak, we don't have any assistance, humanitarian assistance from the United States. They canceled the U.S. aid, which amounted to about $154 million a year. They canceled that.
Does that make Africa and Ghana more reliant on itself, or does it create new vulnerabilities for you?
Actually, that's what led to the Accra reset. After the U.S. aid was canceled, it meant that we needed to stand up for ourselves and make budgetary provision to cover the shortfall in U.S. funding. $154 million, about 72 million of it went into health financing, HIV, AIDS testing, HIV and AIDS research, provision of antiretrovirals, and all that. And suddenly it was gone. We covered the gap in our financing and were able to take care of those expenses. We don't have any financing from Russia. And as I speak, we don't have any financing from China. But our relationships are good with all those countries. Ghana was one of the leading non-aligned movement countries. And so we don't inherit anybody's enemies. And we're not, we're friends to all, enemies to none. And so we have good relations with China, we have good relations with America, we have good relations with Russia. And so that is Ghana's foreign policy. Of course, Africa is the centerpiece of our foreign policy, but our external policy beyond the continent is to maintain friendly relations with all countries.
Ghana in recent years has become also a symbol of democracy, one of West Africa's strongest democracies. What has it done differently that has allowed it to transition peacefully, democratically?
The first comes from our historical experience. After independence, Ghana was among the first to introduce military coups. We got rid of our first president. And after that, it was a cycle of coup d'etats. And we realized that, look, I mean, we're not going anywhere. We're going around in circles. And so after the 31st December revolution with Jerry John Rawlings in 1992, the Commission for Democracy did a survey, and all Ghanaians said, we want to go back to democratic rule, constitutional rule. And so we took the 1992 Constitution onto ourselves. And the good thing about it is we have two dominant political forces, and all of us accept that democracy is the way to go. And so we lose elections, we hand over. They lose elections, they hand over. It's like two puppies, 8 years. It's like two puppies playing.
And you were in office twice.
It's serious business.
It's serious business, but there's that transition that happened seamlessly.
Seamlessly, that's true.
Why do you believe that the rest of West Africa hasn't been able to do the same?
You see, for us and for me, my mission is to show the rest of the world and the rest of Africa that democracy works and that you can create prosperity for people in a democratic atmosphere. It's time consuming, but I believe that whatever progress you make is more sustainable than, if we were in a dictatorship. And both parties understand that. And so far, we're doing good.
Ghana, Mr. President, became a symbol of liberation for sub-Saharan Africa, of course, after the independence in 1957. President Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president at the time, argued that political freedom would be incomplete without economic independence.
Yes.
Nearly 70 years on, do you think that Ghana and Africa have achieved the kind of independence that Nkrumah imagined?
No, we haven't. Indeed, Kwame Nkrumah is a visionary par excellence. I mean, he could see far into the future. There were two things he was concerned about. One, African unity and integration. We're confronted with the same challenges today. And I regret that at the time, our forebears in Africa did not see into his vision and then create a much bigger union than we currently are. Now we're 54 countries, each with its own flag, its own national anthem, its own economy, its own central bank, its own currency, everything. So that's the first regret. The second is that he said, now that we've finished the liberation struggle, the next struggle is against neo-colonialism. Mm-hmm. And exactly is the neo-colonial economic order that we are currently trying to shake off. And so the challenge that us leaders of Africa today face is not the liberation struggle that was fought by Kwame Nkrumah and our forebears. It is the economic struggle to create economic independence, economic advancement for our people, be able to send our children to school, give them the opportunities they deserve, create jobs for them, make life better in our countries so that our children are not crossing the desert and dying in the Mediterranean and all that. So that struggle for us is no longer the liberation struggle, it's the struggle for economic emancipation.
That vision was shared by Nelson Mandela,
yes,
who also argued that Africa needed to not only break the shackles of the colonial past, but also to determine its own future, its own destiny.
Exactly.
If they were both alive today,
yes,
would they be proud of how far the continent has come, even though there remain many challenges, or would
yes,
they be deeply frustrated at how slow the progress has been?
I think we're making progress, even though slow, but I do think that our young people are in a hurry. The Gen Zs and others don't have time to wait for that snail-paced, integration of the continent and economic emancipation. But the thing is...
And 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25.
And the thing is, they have such incredible access to knowledge that we could not have dreamed of when we were their age. And so the tools are there for Africa to leapfrog. And so we must look at technology, we must look at digital services, especially in Ghana. The fintech space is changing so much, our regulation cannot even keep up. Every day, something else is coming up, and we have to recast the regulation to factor it in. And so I believe that things will speed up because of technology, because of artificial intelligence, and the pace at which that sector is developing. I believe that.
Mr. President, although you still have a few years in your current term. When history looks back at your presidency, what do you hope it will say about the role that you and Ghana played in advancing Africa's rise?
For me, leadership is a baton. And I believe that every person comes, runs his share of the race, and hands the baton over to another person. So whatever I'm doing in this short term that I've been given is just my part of the race to move things to another level so that somebody also takes it and continues. And I believe that we've ignited the flame, the whole issue of the Accra reset, natural resource sovereignty, value addition, expanding our economies, integrating the continent. I think all those are conversations whose time have come. And as long as I remain in office, I'll continue to advocate all that. And my hope is that others who will come after us will continue from where we leave off.
President John Mahama, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
For President Mahama, the challenge is not simply adapting to a changing world, but helping reshape it. From the Accra Reset agenda to calls for reform of global institutions, he argues Africa must have a greater role in the decisions that will define its future. Whether that vision becomes reality will depend not only on Africa's ability to build influence, but also on whether the wider international community is.
Like and subscribe. Hit that like button and subscribe for more.